Welcome to episode 52 of the World Builder's Anvil. I'm your host, Jeffrey W. Ingram, and today's topic, test your fantasy world. Don't know where to start building your fantasy world? Do you need more? Does it make sense? Forget any worries and become a crafter of imagination. This is the place that will help prime your mind. Now, it's time to heat up the forge, break out the mithril ingots and hammer. Welcome to the World Builder's Anvil. I'm your host, Jeffrey W. Ingram. Let's sup from the mug of Java and build. So today we're going to be talking about testing your fantasy world. And part of this comes from me, the IT professional, and part of this comes from me as a role player. And this is really focused a lot on people who do framework worlds like I do. Not everyone does this. If you are filling in your world as you're creating a story, this won't work so well. The problem being, it's hard to test something before it's created. And if you are creating your world in conjunction with your stories, the problem will be you can't really play test out those ideas unless it's during the writing process. And you probably shouldn't be doing that unless you're developing games. So what is the point of testing your world? And really, when you start developing a comprehensive world, what you can do is you can actually share it with people in interactive ways. Tell them stories about your world, role play with them. There are different ways to do it. But the idea is start sharing your world with people as soon as you can. They'll give you feedback to your world, and you can use that to make your world better. And the idea, once again, of a framework world is to build a world that will actually contain stories. And you can sit there and look to different cultures you've created, or different states or different races to determine where's the best place to tell the story you want to tell. In some ways, it's sort of like beta readers. You get this a lot when you write novels. You get a group of people who will read your book and they give you feedback, which is a great idea for a story that you've built and you're preparing to share out with other people. You need feedback, honest feedback from people who will work with you to help make the process better. And in a higher level, the same thing with editors. A good manuscript editor will actually go through and help make the manuscript better, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, depending on any kind of book it is. They will make the structure of it work better. They'll make the plot work better than something any individual can do on their own. Some of the things you're going to learn from a testing process is what needs to be fleshed out, or what needs to be ignored more. So if you get a bunch of feedback from people saying, hey, why is this character and the surrounding so focused on something so basic to the culture? You know, you can spend an afternoon describing what every building looks like, but if the buildings don't stand out in the minds of the characters, if there's no reason to describe the building, to them it's a building. It's this kind of building. It's that kind of building. You don't need to describe what the building looks like. And in the same way, when you're developing a world and a culture, as people interact with them via stories, it will allow them to consume some of the detail, and then they can tell you what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong when you're sharing the world out. And it also gives you a chance to check out what you've created. You know, so if I create a new culture and I start describing it to people, and they go, oh, that's Rome. I might want them to feel that. I might not want to feel that. But I can take that information I've gained from them and say, okay, I need to modify it more, or I need to tweak my world around a little bit because I don't even think of it as Rome. Maybe there are elements from Rome I took to make them, but that is not what I want them to think, that they're on Earth in Rome. I want to make them think they're somewhere else, and there's a Latin feel to it, but it is not the same as Rome. When you're doing this, be upfront with the people who are doing it. So let them know that, hey, I've created this world. I want to share stories from this world. Can you help me make my world better? And then ask for feedback. You know, people might just consume it and not want to give feedback because either A, they don't want to hurt your feelings, or B, they don't understand that's what you really want from them. And really, the idea when you're testing a world is to get feedback from people. Always ask. Even if you think it's understood, that's not fair for you to make that assumption. Say, as I share this world with you, the thing I need you to do is comment back to me so I can make my world, my stories better. One of the things I think you shouldn't do here is don't try and test out the story itself. That's for later on. If you have a specific story in mind, work on elements. So if it has a specific setting, do other stories inside of that setting. If it interacts with different factions of the world, do stories about the factions and let people know a little bit about the factions that way. But don't just try and use your story or create a story with the use of other people, unless that's what your goal is. And then they're part of the process as well, too. Their name should be on the book in some format for helping you create your story. Ways to test. Short stories and flash fiction are, I think, awesome for this kind of thing. You can create short pieces that can hopefully engage people. And whether these are meant to be delivered orally or they're meant to be read or both, it doesn't really matter why. However, what you want to do is you want to consume the full story. You want to tell a complete story, not consume it, I apologize. You want to tell a whole story, but make it short out in your world and in your storytelling. Oral storytelling. I think this is great. Go to your library and do it. Have people over to your house and do it. And tell them, hey, come on over. I'm going to give you some wine to loosen you up a little bit. Or we're just going to sit around the couch and I'm going to tell you stories. And I just want your feedback as we're going through the stories. Now, that is a little simpler version of my next thing, which is role-playing games. Now, in the future, I'm going to be kind of going over specific different kinds of role-playing games I've had interaction with. And I'll probably be talking to other people sometimes about games they've interacted with. But different games have different value. Some are very heavy on mechanics. And that's not kind of what you're looking for here. You're looking for something that is really going to let you explore the storytelling aspect of it. Now, if the idea is you're trying to develop a role-playing game, especially if it's a setting with its own mechanics, you'll want to actually, at this point, obviously, play the game that you're trying to develop to make sure that it works and that you can flesh out any mistakes or problems that you can before you get through to publishing it. That way, there will be a need for a second edition at some point, but it won't be to fix glaring errors in it. My preferred method are role-playing games, and one of the biggest reasons why is a lot of my stuff exists and was originally created for role-playing games. I started creating this world. I was playing Dungeons and Dragons, and then I moved over and I started playing GURPS because I thought GURPS better let me express my world without the rules and restrictions of people's previous ideas of what elves are and what orcs are and what monsters are. So I like doing role-playing games, small, intimate groups. I'm very positive of this because players will give you feedback almost sentence for sentence when they're learning stuff. You know, you're trying to explain a thing to them. If they don't get it, you know that you're not explaining it well. Or if they tell you, hey, this just seems silly or this makes no sense to me, you have a chance to fix that before you get the process of actually producing a work for people to purchase from you. Because once purchasing becomes involved, you're going to see less of a forgiveness on the side of the consumer. Now, a big thing in this is to know your avatar. I've talked about an avatar a few different times, but to quickly go over what an avatar is the perfect person to buy the product that you're getting ready to make. And it could be anything. And if you have multiple products, you might have multiple avatars. You might have different ways of trying to sell it to different groups. But the thing you have to remember is no one's work is going to be a panacea for everyone. Some kinds of things are going to have larger audiences than others. Stephen King is going to always have a larger audience than many horror writers. And that's because his writing style appeals a lot more to readers, probably from outside the normal horror genre. But maybe there's more hardcore horror genre people who don't really like his work so much. Because of that, they feel it's sold out or they feel it's fake, which is really unfair because the simple fact is, if you don't like the book, it probably wasn't written with you in mind. You're probably not the avatar of the author. And it's okay to not be the avatar of every book. You know, because you like the fantasy genre does not mean you must like every fantasy work ever created. It might be targeted for younger people, might be targeted for older people. It might be targeted by gender. And you might have a couple different avatars, and you have different ways of trying to market to them. But usually I like to have one avatar for one project I'm working on. It just makes life simpler. But take all of the criticism you receive and realize that not everyone who gives you that criticism is your avatar. And where it might be completely valid criticism, you have to determine whether the constructive criticism you received is actually going to help make the product better for your avatar. So you would say to your avatar, hey, Bill, do you think I should put more information about this mage guild? Should I talk more about the seedy underground of this city? And if Bill says, oh, yeah, I want that, you know you need it. And other times, Bill might say, no, I can see why people will like that, but I don't want to read that in a book, so you can put it in there, but I don't care. And if Bill doesn't care or doesn't like it, then you might not want to put it in there. However, you have to take all of the criticism and really think about it and say, does it really make sense towards what I'm trying to do? Ultimately, the thing to keep in mind is you're trying to find an audience for the works that you're creating. And if you don't find that audience, if you try to speak to 100 different audiences, you're going to find a story that has 100 different groups that dislike what you're creating because of things that you're doing for other groups. So you have to keep your avatar in mind whenever you're making decisions. You might have the greatest work in the world, but if it appeals to less people, you're going to sell less books. And if that's what you want to do, that's your choice. Or if you make a video game, same thing. It might appeal to less people, and if your goal is a small niche, then that's great. If it's a big, giant niche, that's even better. But remember, you're probably not going to, especially when you start off, be able to create something that speaks to all people. And I don't think anyone has the ability to speak to all people. Some people just have really big audiences, and some people have very small audiences. Or some people have no audiences if they're not actually trying to share. Now, the rating for this episode, this is an advanced topic. Because, one, I don't think a lot of people test their worlds out unless they came from a gaming background. And I could be wrong. I'd love to hear from people who do test their world and find out different ways people test their worlds. But I think it's a great idea to do because it will help strengthen the foundation of the stories or the products that you plan to share from the world. The world building task for the day. Pick a way to share an interactive story with people. Whether you want to do a podcast like this, but have a story, a piece of fiction, much like my friend Ray Elliott did with Fractured, or many other people have done as well too. Or even a multimedia experience, but that would take a lot more money and funding to do testing with. Something like The Fire on the Mound, which is another good sort of interactive story that has a lot of elements, but to me that's more of a finished, polished product. And it actually raises a finished, polished product too, but it's meant to be more of a free audiobook on iTunes. But really, if they took parts and played with characters and tested out elements of it before they got there, the world would probably be just a little bit better. And they might have done that, and that might be why those two stories stick out in my mind. However, that is for them to know. The real world task for the day. Get a small group of people together and tell them your story. The interactive story you created for your world building element, share it with people. Tell them your story. Give them short stories. It'll probably be something longer than a Twitter, but something less than flash fiction. And if you have more time, do it out, but realize that the more time you spend testing, the less time you have to develop the product that you ultimately want to share out with people. And the tease for this episode, Magic in Gardul. And some of you are going, wait, I thought we finished the basics, but to me, magic is not a basic. It is something specific to the world, so I'll tell it from my perspective, and you hear more about it then. And as always, make sure to go to gardul.com. That's GARDUL.com for the show notes. It'll be under podcasting, World Builders Anvil. That's a great place to get all of the information from the episode that you've just listened to and to see all the resources that we've talked about in this episode. Thanks for joining us this episode of the World Builders Anvil. Please be sure to rate and review us in iTunes, and please help get the word out to your friends about our show. And join me Jeffrey W. Ingram at Garduel.com to see the progress of my world and learn why I made the choices I did. And please contact me and let me know the topics you would love to hear in the future. Now strike, while the myth rolls high.